Hi, I'd like to tell you about the farming experience and my father's very innovative ideas that he had. A daddy at heart was a farmer, but let me say this, I never saw him in my entire life in anything but dress pants and white cuff shirts. He always wore cufflinks and a tie and a jacket. He was a real dandy about clothes. He would go to Memphis to Philly Halley, or Brooks Brothers would come to the Peabody once a year, and he'd go in and order clothes then. And then Julius Lewis came in Memphis, and that was the men's store then. He had one certain person in each store that waited on him, as my mother did in the stores too. Well, anyway, my daddy kept a journal. He kept journals all through his farming career, which I have those somewhere. They were great big ledgers, and he might have 10 years in a ledger, but he would record like how much rain came that year, or what day he planted cotton on and what day it was harvested. I remember one of the items that was in there was that he said you never plant beans, he was talking about soybeans, after the 15th of June because they won't make. Obviously he'd had a disaster. He would tell how many bushels of beans they combined or how much wheat they had. Although he didn't do a lot of wheat. How many bales of cotton, corn. He didn't plant a lot of corn either. But when I was a real little girl, maybe 5, certainly I wasn't in school, I don't think, he had a huge, huge mule barn on the, well, I have to think of the name of the farm, the Cooking Gray. And I can remember going to that mule barn with him. There was at least over 100 mules in there. And then, of course, as the tractor came in, he got rid of the mules. But he had a great respect for them because he always said he made his money on the back of the mule. Although I never saw my dad on a mule. As I said, I never saw him on a tractor, or I never saw him do any manual work really like that. He just didn't do it. He supervised other people. I remember that the mule barn in Lepanto was owned by a man named Ed Pike, and he bought all of Daddy's mules. It was a huge mule barn because there weren't a lot of people that had the money at that time to buy tractors. I remember going to Memphis one time with Daddy, and he borrowed over $1 million that day from an insurance company to farm on and buy equipment on it. And he said, looked at me and he said, honey, the insurance company's going to own the world before it's over. But that was better rates than he could get, banking or whatever. So, and of course he paid it back at the end of the year. He had very few years when he farmed in the red. He usually was always in the black because he was a good farmer and he knew farming. And he had managers. One of his main managers was a man named Paul Starnes. And Paul was a big part of our family. When I was about 12, Daddy bought Spud and I a Jeep. And he took it into the Ford Motor Company. He had to box it in so it was winterized for us. Then he had an automatic transmission put in. And I started driving when I was 12, and I'm sure Spud was too. We drove on the farm, We'd go out. They kept the Jeep a lot of times at Paul's house where we would go out and get it. This was on the Cooking Gray. No, it was on the Potter Farm. He lived on the Potter Farm. But anyway, when it was time to chop the cotton, my daddy had a colored man named Banny that works for him, and he was like a little Banny Rooster. And he didn't have a last name, so if anybody asked him, he said his name was Banny Richardson. And there again, he was part of our lives. He was just around a lot. We'd say, hi, Banny, what you doing? Or, hey, Mr. Starnes, how are you? And so our job in the summertime, Spud and I, was to deliver cotton sacks. So about 4 o'clock in the morning, the buses would leave, and they would go into the convention center in Memphis and pick up busloads of mainly blacks and bring them out to chop the cotton, or either to pick the cotton when that time came. And then at 5 or 5:30, they would take them back into Memphis and go back the next day, because gathering the crop was real crucial because you never knew what the weather was going to be. And speaking of the weather, I remember saying to my dad one time, I said, Daddy, I think it would be a terrible thing to be a farmer because the weather is so unpredictable. And he said, honey, the weather's a lot more predictable than the common man. I found out that was true. He said, you wake up every day of your life and you fight the bears. Well, I was probably 50 years old before I realized what he was talking about, fighting the bears, But you do. If you're successful in what you're doing, you do fight the bears. But at any rate, we would Mr. Starnes would have all the hose, or as many as he could get in the back of the Jeep, and we'd go along and drop them at each row, so those people that were coming on the bus would have and we'd do the same thing with cotton sacks, when it was time to pick the cotton. That was one of the jobs we had. Sometimes Spud would be doing something else on a tractor or something, and one of my friends would do it with me. We all loved doing that. You grow up on that. But also another thing we would do is we made bologna sandwiches, and we had RC colas and moon pies, and we went back to the fields at lunchtime and sold those for 10 cents a piece. I remember that. But that was one of the jobs that we had because I wanted to keep them working while they had them there. Time was of the essence. So, and no one resented it. I mean, that's what they wanted, what they liked, and what we fixed for them, We just slapped 2 pieces of bologna between 2 pieces of bread and have the RC colas iced down. We would also take big containers of ice water to put at the end of the rows, because some of those rows were real, real long. So it was awfully hard work for those people, I know. But it was fun for us, And we got to keep the money from the sandwiches. But Daddy did make us buy the stuff for him. So it wasn't just, he didn't hand it out to us. We had to do that. Sometimes my friend Faye would help me, or Bessie Lou, or Danette, or whoever. We would go do those. And that was kind of fun, It kind of fills some of our summers up for us, But then the combines began to come in, and the tractors, all sorts of innovative equipment. And if you had a good reputation and you had good credit, you could borrow the money and get all that equipment. And then if you finished up your fields early first, which you would do with the equipment, you'd lease out. You'd send your drivers and your equipment over to somebody else and get paid again. It was a very profitable situation, actually, so that worked really well. But one of the things I wanted to tell you about was there were a lot of people that lived on our farms. And, there, a lot of those kids didn't ever start school until the crop was in. They would start in October. But they were our friends, I remember one boy that was in our graduating class named Junior Baker. He lived at Rivervale. Junior never started school until January, ever. And he kept right up with us. And when our senior trip came, well, our class sponsor was Miss Billy McClellan, and she wanted to take us to New York and to Washington. And so my mother and daddy, and my friend Danette's mother and daddy, the 4 of them rode in the big Cadillac, and all the rest of us were on the school bus. Now, Junior, or anyone that didn't have the money to go, Daddy and Mr. Porter's paid for them to go. We maybe had to have $175, I don't remember. We got to Washington, and Took Athens was our representative, and they had contacted him, and he had a big barbecue in his backyard for our class. And I've got pictures of our whole class on the Capitol grounds. That's pretty precious. That was... From there, we went on to tour. We toured D.C., then we went on through Baltimore, Maryland, and went into New York and stayed at a hotel there. And I remember one of the things we saw a Broadway play. We saw Cat on the Hot Tin Roof by Tennessee Williams, which was a pretty good play. But another thing I wanted to tell you about that time in our lives, when school was out, there was not a lot to do. So my daddy and Mr. Portis hired the best teacher in town named Odessa Millard. And Spud and I, and along with Danette, would go to her house at 8 o'clock every morning, because we'd already done we were through with the fields by 5:30 or 6 in the morning. And her job that summer was to teach us things that we didn't learn in school. We were only the 3 of us, to keep us doing things that... She would take us to Memphis, to symphonies. I saw the Boston Pops, all sorts of things. She took us to a ballet in Memphis. She would take us to the gardens in Memphis where they would have the operettas. She took us to the first play I remember seeing was Cat on a Hot Tin, no, not Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, something about the turtle. I'll think of it in a minute maybe, that she took us to see. But she introduced us to things that we didn't get normally in a school that our parents wanted us to know about. It was music. I had a music teacher, a piano teacher, who was actually a graduate of Juilliard. Her name was Mrs. Pressgrove. And Miss Pressgrove again took Danette and I to the ballet. I remember the star was Alexandra Danilova, who was a very, very famous ballerina at that time. And because she had been at Juilliard with Miss Pressgrove, we went backstage and met Alexandra down low. But that was, and now I paint ballerinas. That's mainly what I paint. And I don't know if it's from those days or if I just thought they were all so beautiful, but that's what I like to paint, is the ballerinas. I've painted 4 or 5, maybe 7, 8, I can't remember. But at any rate, I think that was a great thing that our parents did for us, because they had enough foresight to see that we needed to see those things. And back to our trip to New York, we went to Coney Island. That was fun. And of course, Mother and Daddy and Mr. and Miss Portis and our whole class was there. You know, we just had a wonderful time. And we ate at an automat, you know, where you put your money. I fell in love with New York City. So that next year, right after graduation, Mother and Daddy and Miss Portis took Daddy and I back to New York, and we enrolled in the Barbizon School for Girls. Now, this was the girls' finishing school. We learned to pour tea. Our accent, southern accent, bothered them, but they tried to correct that and couldn't. We learned how to walk. We both had credit cards. I remember that because they were going to help us shop for our college wardrobe and teach us how to dress. So one of the things I remember is that Daddy took us, we went into, I guess it was Macy's, the big store that's on Broadway there at the corner. Yeah, that's the big one, Macy's, yeah. And he was filling out a report to get me a credit card. And I remember the woman said, well, do you have a credit reference, Mr. Richardson? Well, it kind of offended him. And he said, well, you just call up Dun and Bradstreet. Anyway, we got our credit cards, let me put it that way. And we stayed. We were there for several months and just had a wonderful time and loved New York, and went to, just the two of us. We lived in the Barbizon Hotel for girls. And we just had it was a wonderful time. But what was so funny, I remember if we came home on the train and we had to change trains in somewhere in Louisville, I think is where it was. No, it was in Bowling Green. And so we were going to get something to eat. And I said, Daddy, I don't have any money. I'd spent all my money. She said, I'd spent all mine too. Well, soldiers were on there. So they bought us lunch. We just had a great time. It was really fun. And it was my first train ride. Well, actually, I had a train ride when I was really young, but that was my first solo train ride without my parents. But I'd ridden the city of New Orleans when I was about 7, maybe, with my Aunt Lurleen down to New Orleans. Or Birmingham, somewhere. I can't remember where we went. But she made the great sacrifice and let me ride on the train with her. And then Mother and Daddy met us there. But at any rate, it was a great way to grow up, you know. Just pretty special. But back to the farming, as I said, Daddy was very, very innovative. He was the first to put in major irrigation systems. That was brand new. No one else had done it in that area. And I remember once the family, the 5 of us, made a trip to Little Rock. And in the basement of the Capitol of Little Rock, was a video film about my dad. And Spud was in it, I remember that. And all the irrigation he had done. It was like, this is the new innovation. And I wish I had a copy of that or remembered more about it. But I remember, you know, standing there and watching this video slide by of his farming experience, which I thought was pretty impressive, you know, then. And it was a long, torturous drive to Little Rock at that time. In fact, the road from Lepanto to West Memphis was gravel.
Oh, wow.
And I was... you know that junction in West Memphis where they're always working? Well, about 4 years ago, I was coming through there, and I called my friend Danette. I said, Danette, here's where I am. I said, we are 50 years old, and for 50 years they've been working at this junction. We were both out laughing. She said, well, I'm on a plane going to Scotland. And I said, well, I hope you don't have big orange things there. And I said, but one last thing. I said, you know those big orange things they have around? I have a theory about why they're always there. She said, why? And I said, they don't have any place to store them. So that's been a joke between the two of us for a long time. But anyway, it was. I remember when the bridges from West Memphis to Memphis were wooden. I remember that very well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they were wooden bridges across there.
Oh, that's scary.
And it was just rickety, rickety, rickety. They would make all these little noises, you know. We would... Memphis was our center of everything. Daddy would go into Memphis at least... I see he went at least once a week, and he went to a Negro barber shop that was right around the corner on Beale, right off of Beale. right down pretty close to the river, and he would get a haircut and a shave and a manicure. You know, he was very fastidious about doing all that. But right around the corner from that was a record store called the House of the Blues, which is where, you know, we were big into records. We had the 45s at that time. So after school sometime, a carload of us would go to the slip off. Our mothers wouldn't know where we were. We'd lie about it, of course. And we would go to the House of the Blues. And if I didn't have any money, now this is so funny, I would walk around the corner to the black barber shop. And I'd open the door, and the owner would say, well, Miss Joyce, how are you today? And I'd say, is my daddy here, you know? No, ma'am, he's not. What do you need? And I said, well, I want to get some records. He'd give me $10 and put it on Daddy's tab, and I'd go back and get my records. I've often wondered whatever happened to that sweet, kind man. And, you know, Daddy never fussed at me about that. He didn't care. But we'd walk around there, and I'd get my money. And, you know, back then, you didn't have gas cards, charge cards. I could stop anywhere in Martree, Lepanto, Osceola, and fill it up and say, send the bill to my daddy. Mm-hmm. They never questioned me, you know. Of course, it was, you know, East Arkansas is like one great big fraternity. It's always been that way. I suppose it still is. We knew all the kids in Martree. We knew all the kids in Tyronza and Osceola, and just, you know, all around. We were all friends. We all did things together. Mm-hmm. Every year when Daddy and I would come home from school at Christmas, our parents would rent the Region Hut. We would have a huge big dance with the band. And normally we would have the luau from Memphis come out and cater that. They'd have a whole suckling pig, you know. It was, and the kids from all over were there, you know what I'm saying? It was just a big thing we did. We did it annually once a year for several years. I guess until she got married, yeah, because she married first. But maybe that was maybe 3 years. And kids would be there from all over. And then we'd close that down. We would go to the Cotton Club in West Memphis, but we would lie about where we were going. They never knew that we were there. The Plantation Club, that's what it was called. But it was fun. We had a good time. And we didn't drink. We didn't smoke. We didn't know anything about dope. I never saw beer in my family's home. My parents really never drank much unless they had company. They would have some wine or had some alcohol for gas. Once a year on Christmas we would have champagne, but no one drank it because we didn't like it. I still don't like it. But anyway, that was it was a great way to grow up, and it was just wonderful. And as I said, he was a fabulous farmer and was home a lot. We used to say, why don't you go get a job like everybody else's daddy? He would laugh at us. Of course, what we didn't know was he was up at 5 o'clock and out, and one of the things was when he came back home at 7:15, you might not want to eat breakfast, but you better be at the table. You had to be sitting there, you know. And except for Mother. Mother slept. She was the princess. She didn't have to get up. He managed the breakfast. Of course, Annie Mae or Ernestine came in and cooked breakfast every morning, you know. But he wanted us all sitting there, and we had to be there. But anyway, it was, and of course we came home for lunch. Even after they had a cafeteria, they built a new school right by our house, basically. Well, Spud and I came home for lunch, and we'd always bring a friend, because it was better food, you know. And of course, with my grandparents living right across the street, we'd go there after school, because she always had cookies and all sorts of treats for us. So it was a great way to grow up.